The night I realized my mother-in-law had been slowly stealing from me, I was sitting at my own kitchen table, reviewing spreadsheets at 11 p.m., wearing my husband's old college sweatshirt and eating cold leftover pasta straight from the container. Not exactly the dramatic movie moment you'd expect. No gasping, no shattering glass. Just me, a fork, and a number on a screen that didn't add up. Let me back up. My name is Thea. I'm 31 years old, I have a CPA license, a rescue dog named Biscuit, and until about 14 months ago, I had what most people from the outside would have called a genuinely good life. I was a junior partner at a mid-size accounting firm in Charlotte. My husband Cody and I had been married for 4 years. We had a nice house in a suburb with good schools, even though we didn't have kids yet. We grilled on weekends. We argued about whose turn it was to unload the dishwasher. Normal, quiet, solid. What most people didn't see was his mother. Her name is Lynette. I won't give her a last name because honestly she doesn't deserve the space. She is 63 years old, recently widowed, and she has spent every single day of my marriage finding new and creative ways to remind me that I was a guest in her son's life. Not a partner, not a wife. A guest who had overstayed her welcome before she even unpacked her bags. In the beginning I told myself it was grief. Her husband, Cody's father, had passed away 8 months before Cody and I got engaged. I thought she was transferring her loss onto me, that I was an easy target for her pain. I made excuses for her. I swallowed a lot of words I should have said out loud. I kept the peace. That's what you do when you love someone's son. You keep the peace. She would make comments about my cooking at Sunday dinners. Nothing direct. Just a little, "Oh, Cody always loved my version of this," delivered with that soft, sad smile she had perfected over decades. She would rearrange things in my kitchen when she came to visit, put the glasses in different cabinets, reorganize my pantry, and then act confused when I asked her about it. "I was just trying to help, sweetheart. I didn't realize you had a system." She would call Cody on his cell phone in the middle of date nights, always with some minor emergency that needed his voice. Not a text, not an email. His voice. Cody loved his mother. I understood that. I respected it, but there's a line between loving your mother and letting her treat your wife like temporary furniture, and Cody stood on the wrong side of that line for a very long time. The money thing started small. That's how these things always start. When Cody's father passed, he left behind a modest estate. Nothing extravagant, but solid. A paid-off house, some investments, a savings account. The will was straightforward. Everything split equally between Cody and his sister Patrice, with Lynette retaining use of the family home during her lifetime. Simple, clean, document. Cody trusted his mother completely with the estate administration. She was executor. He had a demanding job in project management, long hours, travel. He didn't have time to go through every line item. He didn't think he needed to. She was his mother. I was the one who offered to help, not to snoop, not because I suspected anything. I offered because I'm an accountant, and I noticed, completely by accident, that a reimbursement check Cody received from the estate for funeral expenses was about $3,000 less than what our records showed we had actually spent. I mentioned it to Cody. He waved it off. "Mom probably just made a calculation error. She's been through a lot." I let it go. But the number stayed with me the way numbers do when you work with them all day. It just sat in the back of my mind, small and persistent, like a splinter you can't quite reach. 6 months later, Lynette asked Cody to co-sign a loan. Not a huge amount. $40,000. She said the roof of the family home needed replacing and the estate accounts were tied up in some pending paperwork. Cody came to me and said he wanted to help her. What did I think? And I said gently that before co-signing anything we should probably ask to review the estate statements, just to understand the full financial picture. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Lynette called me controlling. She told Cody I was trying to cut him off from his family. She cried on the phone for 40 minutes and told him that his father would be heartbroken to see what I was doing to their relationship. Cody came home quiet and distant that evening. He didn't yell. He was never a yeller. He just got very still and asked me if I could please not make this harder than it needs to be. I co-signed the loan. And I started keeping records. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do this out of spite. I didn't sit there rubbing my hands together plotting some grand revenge. I did it because I'm an accountant and something felt wrong, and when something feels wrong in numbers, you document it. It's not dramatic, it's just what you do. You create a file, you track the discrepancies, you wait to see if a pattern emerges. The pattern emerged. Over the next several months, I quietly requested copies of the estate statements. Lynette stalled, gave Cody partial documents, claimed she was waiting on the estate attorney for final numbers. Meanwhile, I started going back through everything I could access: our own bank records, the reimbursement checks, the property tax records for the family home, documents Cody had in his own files that he'd never really looked at. What I found, piece by piece, was not a mistake. It was not a grieving widow accidentally miscalculating. It was a deliberate and methodical siphoning of estate assets. Reimbursements claimed for expenses that never happened, transfers to a personal account I had never seen before, listed in the ledger as estate maintenance, a personal credit card bill, hers alone, not any estate expense, paid directly from the estate account twice in the same year, and the $40,000 loan, which was never going toward a roof. The roof had been replaced 2 years earlier. I found the original contractor invoice in a folder in our filing cabinet that Cody had never opened. Total discrepancy by my count, just over $90,000. I sat with that number for 3 days before I told anyone. I told my own mother first. She lives in Raleigh, 2 hours away, and she has known me long enough to understand when I am not being hysterical. She listened. She asked questions. She told me to call an attorney before I said a single word to Cody or Lynette. I did. The estate attorney I found, a woman named Ms. O'Coffer's colleague, a sharp-eyed woman who specialized in exactly this kind of case, reviewed everything I brought her. She didn't flinch. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She said, "This is textbook executor misconduct," and then she laid out my options. I drove home from that meeting and I made dinner. Chicken piccata, Cody's favorite. I set the table. I poured us both a glass of wine, and when he asked how my day was, I said fine, because I needed one more night to figure out how to say what I had to say. The next morning, I sat across from my husband at that same kitchen table where I'd found the numbers, and I told him everything. I brought the folder. I walked him through each item the same way I would walk a client through a discrepancy. Calm. Clear. No accusations, just documentation. Just facts. He went very quiet. Not the distant quiet from before. A different quiet. The kind that precedes something breaking open. He asked me 3 times if I was sure. I showed him 3 times. He asked if I could have made an error. I told him I had a licensed estate litigation attorney who had reached the same conclusion from the same documents. He put his face in his hands for a long time and didn't say anything. Then he said, "I need to talk to her." I said, "Okay, but the attorney needs to be involved before anything formal happens." He nodded. What followed was the worst 6 weeks of my marriage. Cody confronted his mother. Lynette denied everything initially, then said the discrepancies were misunderstandings. Then cried and said her health had been bad and she hadn't been managing things carefully, then accused me directly to Cody's face of fabricating documents to steal from the family. She told him I had always been after his inheritance, that I had married him for the money from the start. I was standing in the doorway of our living room when she said that. I was bringing them coffee because I thought maybe neutral ground, maybe if I wasn't in the room they could talk more honestly. I heard every word. Cody told her to stop. That was the first time in 4 years I had heard my husband tell his mother to stop. She escalated after that. She called Patrice, Cody's sister, and told her version of events first. Patrice called Cody furious, convinced I was the villain. Our house phone, the landline we barely used, started ringing at odd hours. My mother-in-law would leave voicemails for Cody that were genuinely unhinged. Long, rambling, weeping messages about how he was abandoning her, how she had given her whole life to this family, how his father must be turning in his grave. I started sleeping badly. I started snapping at people at work. I would sit in my car in the parking garage before going into the office and just breathe for 5 minutes, because I needed to recalibrate before I could function. There were nights when Cody and I barely spoke, not because we were angry at each other, but because there weren't words available for what we were both feeling. I want to be honest about this part because I think people skip it in these stories. They skip the part where it's just hard, where it's not dramatic and climactic, it's just exhausting and sad, and you don't know what's going to come out the other side. I didn't know if my marriage was going to survive this. I genuinely didn't know. What saved us, I think, was the moment Patrice saw the actual documents. Cody asked her to come down from Greensboro. He sat her down with the same folder I had put together. He walked her through it the same way I had walked him through it. Patrice is a nurse. She is practical and sharp, and she doesn't have much patience for nonsense. She looked at those papers for about 20 minutes without saying a word. Then she looked at Cody and said, "Mom stole from us. Not from me. From us. From both of them. From their father's estate." I think that was the moment the ground shifted permanently. The legal process moved slowly, the way legal processes do. The estate attorney filed for a formal accounting, which Lynette's own attorney tried to delay. There were hearings. There were long silences between phone calls from our lawyer with updates. There were weeks when nothing seemed to be happening, and weeks when everything was happening at once. What I learned during all of it is that executor misconduct is far more common than people realize, and it is almost always committed by someone the family trusted completely. That's the mechanism. That's how it works. The trust is the cover. Lynette's attorney eventually negotiated a settlement rather than go to trial. She repaid the estate, the full $92,000 the final accounting revealed, from the equity in the family home. The home had to be sold. That was the hardest part for Cody, I think. He grew up in that house. He learned to ride a bike in that driveway. Whatever his mother had done, losing the house felt like losing something that belonged to his childhood. Not just to her. I held his hand the day the sale closed. He didn't cry in front of me, but I could feel him holding it in, and I just kept my hand in his, and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Lynette was required to resign as executor. A neutral third-party administrator was appointed to finish closing the estate. Patrice and Cody received the assets they were owed, significantly reduced by the legal fees and the time it all took, but there. My mother-in-law and I have not spoken since the day she called me a gold digger in my own living room. I don't expect we ever will. Cody calls her occasionally. She is living in an apartment now, smaller than anything she's been used to. He doesn't tell me what they talk about and I don't ask. That is the arrangement we have found and it works well enough. What I want to talk about, though, is not her. She gets too much space already in this story. I want to talk about what it actually took to hold all of this together when everything in me wanted to just walk away. Because I thought about leaving, I want to say that clearly. There were nights in those 6 weeks when I lay awake next to my husband and thought, I could just go. I could call my mother, pack a bag, drive to Raleigh, and let all of this be someone else's problem. I was exhausted. I felt like I had done everything right, documented carefully, acted reasonably, tried to protect my husband from information that hurt him, and I was still being treated like the person who had caused the damage. That feeling is not unique to me. I know that from reading other people's stories. When you're the one who tells the truth in a family that has been lying, you become the enemy. The messenger becomes the villain. It is a completely irrational but completely predictable reaction, and understanding that it was predictable helped me not take it personally. At least not completely. I stayed because Cody came back to me. Not all at once, slowly. The way someone walks back from a very cold place into warmth, a little at a time, not dramatically, just incrementally returning. He started asking my opinion again. He started telling me things before he called his mother. Small adjustments that told me he was figuring out where he stood. He apologized one evening on our back porch in October, out of nowhere, in the middle of a completely normal conversation. He just stopped talking and said, I should have listened to you earlier. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to prove it. I didn't have a perfect response ready. I just said, I know. Because I did know. And because sometimes that's enough. The firm promoted me to senior partner 5 months ago. I have my own office now with a window that looks out over the city. Biscuit has figured out how to open the treat cabinet in the kitchen and has been silently helping himself for probably 3 weeks before we noticed. Cody and I are trying for a baby, which feels like an enormous and terrifying and completely right thing to be doing. I am not going to tell you that what happened made me grateful or that I see it as a blessing. I don't believe in reframing abuse as a gift. What I will tell you is that I learned something specific and practical from all of it. I learned that your instincts about numbers, about things not adding up, are worth following even when the people around you tell you to let it go. I learned that keeping documentation is not an act of hostility. It is an act of self-preservation. I learned that a marriage can survive a hard truth better than it can survive a comfortable lie. And I learned that protecting yourself is not the same as being cold. You can protect yourself and still love people. You can hold a boundary and still hold someone's hand. Those things are not opposites. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like something doesn't add up, in your family, in your finances, in the way someone speaks to you, I want you to trust that feeling. Not to be paranoid, not to assume the worst about everyone, but to look at the numbers, to write things down, to call someone who knows more than you do and ask them to look at it too. The truth has a way of being exactly what it is, no matter how much someone wants you to believe otherwise. You just have to be willing to follow it all the way to the end. I'm glad I did. If any part of this resonated with you, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever had to be the one to uncover a hard truth in your own family? How did you handle it? Hit the like button if this story meant something to you, and subscribe to Restoration Stories for more stories about people who found their way back to themselves. Your peace, your worth, and your right to the truth. None of those things are negotiable. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I think about Lynette sometimes, not with anger anymore. That burned off a long time ago. I think about her in a more practical way, the way you think about a cautionary example. She spent years building a careful architecture of control over her son, over her household, over the money her husband left behind after a lifetime of working for it. And the entire structure rested on one assumption, that nobody would look closely enough. That assumption was the thing that undid her. Not me, not the attorney, not the judge, her assumption. There is something that I have come to understand about the way consequences actually work in real life, and it is this: they are almost never immediate. They accumulate. Every choice a person makes deposits something into the ledger of who they are and what they've built, and for a long time the balance might look fine from the outside. Lynette looked fine from the outside for years. Grieving widow, devoted mother, woman who just wanted to hold her family together. The story she told about herself was convincing enough that even her own children believed it completely. But the ledger doesn't lie. That's the thing about numbers. And about character. You can obscure it for a while. You can delay the accounting. But you cannot permanently falsify the record. Eventually someone sits down and actually looks. What I want people to take from my story is not that they should be suspicious of everyone they love. That's not it. What I want is for people to understand that paying attention is not an act of aggression. Asking questions is not a betrayal. When Cody asked me to let it go, he was asking me to participate in the same comfortable blindness that had allowed the problem to grow in the first place. He wasn't doing it maliciously. He was doing it because looking closely at the people you love is genuinely hard. It requires you to hold two true things at once. That someone can matter to you deeply and also be doing something wrong. That's the real test of intelligence in relationships. Not whether you're smart enough to catch the error. Whether you're honest enough with yourself to admit you saw it. Cody passed that test. Slowly, painfully, but he passed it. And I think our marriage is built on something real now, in a way it wasn't before. We know we can survive a hard truth together. That's not nothing. That's actually a lot. The courage part. The part I had to talk myself into more than once was not the documenting or the attorney or the confrontation. The courage was deciding that I was worth protecting, that my instincts deserved to be followed even when the people around me found it inconvenient, that I would rather have one difficult year than spend 20 more years in a house where something felt quietly wrong and I had chosen to ignore it. I'm not special for doing that. Anyone can do it. It just requires deciding that the truth matters more than the temporary comfort of not knowing. Thea.